The title of my talk is Creative Philosophy. And the reason I sort of got to this was many, many years ago, I was asked to give a talk about what I looked for in great work. And I sort of went, well, stuff I like, really, which, as you can imagine, makes a very, very short talk. And so I had to really think about this. And I had to look back at what I was doing, the kind of work I was doing, the work I loved, the work that really got me not only from studying painting to being a graphic designer to then wanting to go into advertising, but the work that really, really moved me and I truly admired. And so I constructed this talk around that. And the reason I think this is fundamentally important is I talk a lot to my creative people and other creative people and this fantastic creative audience here. And I genuinely don't believe you can be a successful creator unless you have some fundamental beliefs and that you put those beliefs into your work. And I don't care what it is you do. I don't care if you're designing a leaflet to push through people's doors or you're creating a building. Creative people are ciphers. They take in all kinds of information and they feed it back out. And I think your creative beliefs are fundamental to your success. And I sort of talk about, there's a great thing that you can say about, people often say to me, what's the greatest of all art forms? And a lot of people say music is the greatest of all art forms. And I disagree with that. I think it's the second greatest of all art forms. I think life is the greatest of all art forms. So in a way, what you are, who you are, what you do is fundamental to being creative. We are all of us creative. Of course, some of us earn our living by it, some don't. So I think, in a sense, you can define creativity as an expression of self. So what is it that you believe in? What is it that drives you forward, gets you up in the morning? Why do you do that piece of work? Why do you put that building up? Why do you design a piece of typography like that? What is it that's driving you? What do you want to do? And if you can't answer that question, then I think you will not be as successful as you need to be. Now, I don't want everybody to think, oh, Jesus Christ, I've got to go out and get my creative philosophy. Quick, Google. Creative philosophy is on Google. Get Google out. Oh, yes, that's all right. I've got some there. That's great. That really works very well. But the journey I would ask you to go through is just, you go through your work. You look at, and just be, you're aware of what you do, and suddenly you kind of are connected to the things that you love and the things that you believe in. And that's what really drove me forward. I was driven by irreverence. And I sort of thought about that. And I looked at all my work and looked at the things that I loved and the things that really turned me on. And I'm an age when I can remember a time before rock and roll. I know, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe for me. How do you think I feel? That sort of experience in this explosion of rock and roll and what it did was fantastic in my life. And irreverence had always been a part of it. But what was interesting in this speech, what I did was I said, well, of course, the world, creativity and communication wasn't always irreverent. It didn't appreciate irreverence. In fact, it was about revering. And so if you looked at creativity, hundreds of years ago, of course, creativity was in the hands of authority. And they, in a way, controlled it. They controlled, artists were commissioned, they had to do, in a way, what they were told. And this always, I always like this picture because, this is a typical kind of, commissioned painting from, who knows, the Renaissance times. And I always love pictures like this because it obviously said to the artist, just make me look big. That guy must be about, if you look at the horse, I think he must be about, 7 foot. It's great. And of course, if you were a painter and he said to you, make me look big and you didn't, if you didn't, you kind of lost your head or something like that. So, I'm going to make him look bigger. a bit like now when the client says, make the logo bigger. Yeah, all right, okay, make the logo bigger. But I could have loved the idea of this, that sort of, because art was it was controlled by authority, it was controlled by rulers, it was controlled by the state, whoever they were, and of course it was controlled by the church. And the church was a powerful force and commissioned enormous numbers of paintings. And so, and the job of the commission was to make people revere. You've got to revere. And so, I always think actually that, Renaissance artists, in some way, there's sort of great similarity to what we have to do in advertising, and I'm sure in design and things like that, is that everybody knew the bloody story, So how do I keep making it different? And so, the artist's job would be to sort of, I see it like this, or I see it like that, and they had to keep changing it and altering it so that you found a new way of belief. And I have this sort of vision of kind of, the church going, right, we've done the Kate Moss period. We're moving off Kate Moss now. We want another look for the Virgin Mary. What's the new look for the Virgin Mary? And the artist would have to come, I've got a new look for the Virgin Mary, whatever that is, it's a bit more ethereal now. We're going into ethereal now. That's really, really good. That's fantastic. And actually this was, in a way they kind of had to keep, it's like I do with when we worked on worked on Levi's, everybody knew what a pair of jeans looked like. I had to keep coming up with a new way of telling you about these jeans. The Renaissance artists had the same thing. They had to do the same piece of work. And of course, it was sort of dramatic ways of showing it. And all of these things were sort of, revering, though. But they had to revere. The church didn't like it. You were in serious, serious trouble. And of course, the crucifixion was the one that was, oh my God, there were so many paintings around that one. And imagine going in with your new idea for the crucifixion. I think I'll have him coming off the cross. Oh, good, we haven't done that for some time. That's a good one. Let's have him coming down as opposed. We can do going up. We've done going up. We've had him hanging out. Let's do coming down. This was the function of artists. That's what they were doing. And of course, we come on to the ultimate art director. And I think for me, the greatest of all art directors was Michelangelo. So, you think about him as a painting, I think about him as an art director. He was, he disagreed with the client, he was late, and he was over budget. What a great art director. Absolutely fantastic. But of course, there was one, when I always think the other thing about the Sistine Chapel too is that, you can imagine them all sitting around going, right, okay, this is it, lads, this is it. We're going to do this. We're going to make them believe in God. Make them believe in God. Got to, revere. And somebody, the very first media man, I think, was in the meeting. Because they said, we've got this bloke Michelangelo. He's quite a good art director. Knock out a few drawings. And and he's going to do the walls. And the media man said, what about the ceiling? And they went, what do you mean? The ceiling. Think about it. Placement. It's the medium is the message. You've got to do that. You look up and what do you see? You see God. And so this was a sort of fantastic commission for Michelangelo, and he obviously now famous, and the Sistine Chapel ceiling, of course, is genius media placement. But there's something about that not a lot of people know. That although revering was fundamental to this, in actual fact, there was so much nudity. We always seem to have a problem with sex and naked bodies, don't we? There was so much nudity in this that they got a later artist, Daniel de Volterra, to paint over lots of the naked bits. Great legacy, isn't it? I painted over Michelangelo's work. So, when you've presented some work and it gets changed, just, you realize that Michelangelo had the same problem. I'm not sure, actually, that he saw God in a pink negligee. And I don't know if that was Daniel Volterra's work, but I'm not sure about that. Are you? What do you think? What are you going to put God in? Pink negligee? Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah. I like pink. What about blue? No. Is he gay? No, he's not. He's bisexual. Another bolt of lightning. So there we are. We sort of, so we see all this, we see this revering, this is what it was all about. That's what art's function was. But of course, it began to change. It changed because society began to question, because the invention by Mr. Gutenberg of movable type and the printing press, knowledge began to spread out. It was no longer necessarily, or authority began to crumble. And art began to question. And it questioned, do we necessarily believe in that? Is that right? So artists obviously were kind of communicators, and what they were now communicating is the changing world that everybody was living in. And to sort of, ripple dissolve through that because of time, you get to kind of, this was interesting, supper at Caravaggio's Supper at Emmaus was actually considered quite daring at the time, as it presented Christ as a sort of smooth-skinned, youngish man, and it was considered not the right thing to do, but a very daring thing for Caravaggio to do. So there was a bit of irreverence, but not a huge amount. So as I said, so we went on. Artists were questioning. Society was changing, and they were reflecting all of those changes. To sort of, if I go to the Dadaists, I flipped all the way through here because of time. But, the idea of Duchamp or painting, a moustache on the Mona Lisa. Why did they do that? What did they believe in? They were appalled by the behavior of authority in the First World War and how they sent millions of people to slaughter. And this was, in a way, their form of protest. They were objecting. They were sort of being irreverent. And, we've all seen Duchamp's toilet. So these things, so creativity was obviously now it was kind of challenging, and that was its function. And it was really, really beginning to develop a different dialogue with the audience. And of course, the other thing that was amazing, one forgets, that I think it was William Turner who was one of the first artists to sell his work direct to the public. You always had to go through other people. One thinks now of, commissioning artists or getting a painting or anything. You couldn't do it, but that, of course, had changed. And, the point about irreverence is it not only affected the art world. If one thinks about the Bauhaus and one thinks about what they were doing, you saw irreverence beginning to creep into all kinds of forms of art. I mean, I thought, if you think about it, the Bauhaus was there to kind of challenge conventional thinking. It was to make products that were going to meet a new age. It wasn't going to accept the way things were done. It was going to use industrial materials instead of traditional materials. But the thing they had to do is make it look attractive. And not only, in typography, the Bauhaus was a complete school of performing arts and furniture and architecture. It was an incredible place. And it obviously, affected typography. So, it changed the way we looked and we read things. And that was, irreverence. It was challenging us. It was trying to say to us, you've got to think differently. You've got to think of something else. And I think, if you go back and then you look at other forms of creativity, you look at jazz, the foundation of jazz. Jazz was the voice of disaffected people who were taken, from their home country, and how could they express their point of view? And jazz was the way they did that. And of course, at the time, it's again, we forget that this was considered by white people at the time as the devil's music. It was played in bordellos, and it was disgraceful and shocking, and but it was challenging, and it was exciting, and it was doing things which had never been done before. It was a sort of fantastic form of music. And of course, as we know, it finally sort of morphed through the blues, into rock and roll. And of course, we all know the story that Elvis Presley was not allowed to be filmed on television below the waist because it was actually shocking what he was doing. So, irreverence now was kind of, because it was challenging, and it was fundamentally important to challenge, to question. I always say to, creative people, the most important word you ever use is why. Why? And if you keep using that word, you'll sort of discover, you'll get a conversation going that can really be interesting. And I love the fact that this was going on. I mean, this was just a fantastic period when we were really challenging things. And it's just interesting. I didn't realize that they would have mini cars. And this car became a design icon, and it was a genius piece of design by a man called Alekis Sigonis. And what made it brilliant was his brief was, how do you make a small car big? How do you get 4 people into a small car in great comfort? And he did one simple thing that nobody had thought of before. One very, very simple thing. He actually said, turn the engine sideways. Just turn the engine sideways. So you have more room in the car than you have for the engine. And therefore you create more space for the passengers. Brilliant piece of irreverent thinking. Nobody thought of it. All engines went that way, but the car went that way. He said, why? Turn it sideways. Brilliant. Genius, isn't it? I mean, just absolutely fantastic. Which is why it's, in my view, it's remained, and it still has the engine sideways. Why it's become, in my view, a fantastic design icon. So, we can see how irreverence infects, not only that, but architecture. My favorite architect is Frank Lloyd Wright. I mean, Falling Water House is just absolutely incredible. He did, instead of building it next to the river or, trying to sort of make it work with it, he just built it over the river. It goes through the house. I thought, absolutely fantastic. I mean, brilliantly irreverent. And then, the same, I mean, the Guggenheim is just, I think, one of the finest buildings in the world. I mean, you just look at it and you realize that, first of all, you can't, a museum, a gallery with kind of round walls, but hold on, wait a minute, how does that work? It works. But the brilliant thing I think about it is that all those buildings, if you're going up that avenue, are sort of flat-fronted, and you come to the Guggenheim, and you're kind of confronted by this different statement. So even before you walk into the building, you're thinking differently. You're thinking, my God, this is absolutely incredible. It's challenging you. It's challenging you not to accept the status quo. Absolutely fantastic building. My favourite. And of course, that goes on with Gehry and what he's done with Bilbao. I mean, just amazing. I mean, just as a structure, I don't know if anybody's been there, but it really is a phenomenal building. You're just, it challenges you before you, as I say, you walk through that door. So, why is this irreverence important to what I do? Well, it's interesting because if you go back to what I was saying about those artists and how they were challenging, how that we were differing points of view were coming forward and people were expressing them, in a way, if you're in the advertising, communication industry, design industry, we are presented with choice of objects, choice of products that we have never known before. I mean, it's almost, in a sense, overwhelming, this choice. How do you make a choice? How do you, if you're going through all this, how do you decide which one you're going to do, which one you're going to buy, which one you're going to use? I mean, buying a television set becomes this kind of, huge problem. Or even as simply buying a pair of shoes. I mean, we're confronted with choice like we've never, ever, ever had before. And we, as communicators, have to kind of find a way of making people look at what we're doing and not the other person. And that's the crucial point. Not only when I'm creating a piece of work, I have to kind of go, why is this better? And actually, why is it actually, without actually mentioning it, better than them? Just in the way somebody would argue a point, a philosophical, political point, or whatever they might do. So irreverence becomes a kind of important, for me anyway, has become an important focus in my work. It drives my appreciation of what it is we're doing, because it forces you to think, forces you to consider. and therefore becomes very powerful. And I find in work, when it has that there, it attracts me. I just love it. But, there can be problems with that. Now, punk, you could argue, was incredibly irreverent. Unbelievably irreverent. I mean, God Save the Queen. Just the whole ethos of punk was to break everything down, to smash it down, to challenge, to kind of rip it apart. But the problem with that is, as communicators, as I was saying, if we are pulling something down, we've got to put something back in its place. You can't just pull something down and say, I'm just pulling it down. It becomes negative. It becomes something that doesn't construct. It doesn't reconstruct. And I think, and you can disagree with me, happy to do so, that was punk's failing. Whereas, I think Warhol and the pop artists, who I happen to love, what they were trying to get us to do was to say, look, things have changed. These are now the icons. These are the people who are making, who we should be looking to. And of course, we know that, that's his most famous portrait. And I think what kind of challenges you about it is to sort of, why am I looking at her like that? Why is she now an icon? By the way, I don't know if you've ever seen, I was very lucky to go, I was in New York and it was sadly a year after Warhol died, and I went to the Whitney. They had a retrospective of his work, and one of the things that I hadn't realized is that when he did these originals, he actually had them the size that we all know, sort of silk-screened onto screen. But they were sort of on canvases, 8 foot high, all gold. So you really looked at it and you thought, oh my God, icons. And of course that doesn't reproduce, so we only ever see it in this edited form. But I think what was genius about him was that he was saying to us, come on, these are the icons now, not the ones that you used to have. And I think that was incredibly constructive, and that's what we have to be. If we are breaking something down, we've got to put something else in its place. And I think that, his electric chair series for me, if you've seen any of them in the flesh, even like this, I find them quite amazing pieces of irreverent work. I'm going to put this up. This is what we're doing. Think about it. We're putting people in this chair and we're electrocuting them. And he iconized it. Phenomenal piece of irreverent thinking. But, as I've said, that the problem with irreverence is that unless you propose, you can't just destroy, you will come unstuck. And I personally feel this was a campaign that did exactly that many years ago now. United Colours of Benetton. Hey, I'll show a man dying. I'm only selling a jumper, but I'll show a man dying. It's so cynical. So horribly cynical. I was less bothered with the baby, but I mean, for me, it was cynical. And I think, obviously, great work. Whatever you're doing, the truth is the finest strategy you can ever employ. But cynicism, I believe, is the death of creativity. So, I found these works very cynical, and that's why I don't think they worked, and that's why I don't think Benetton, I believe, is not the great company it should be. And of course, we've all done this trick. Advertising's 80% idea, it's 80% execution. Now, hold on, that's 160%. Even my maths can do that one. But that's the conundrum. That we're obsessed with ideas. We're an ideas factory. You go around the corridors of BBH, and all you'll hear is, so what's the idea? What's the idea? What's the idea? And then it's how do you turn that idea into something magical and special? And that's where I think craft is fundamentally important, the essence of craft. And I'm very disappointed with our industry today. I'm disappointed in the quality of the work that's coming out, and I'm disappointed in the craft that's going into that work. And craft is fundamentally important in expressing your idea. It's no good having a brilliant idea if you don't find a way of expressing it that really captures people's emotions. And of course, one of the great ways we talk about doing that, the great way of doing that for us is humor. Humor is fundamentally important. And, we've all done this simple trick, haven't we? You print the word crap, or, I could have got an even ruder word, but I didn't do that. No. And you do that with it, and then all of a sudden it changes its meaning. And of course, what we have to understand, and what you know, is that humour is the enemy of authority. And that's why I think humour is so powerful, why we should be constantly looking for it, certainly in the work that we do. I think even, I'm not sure it works for undertakers, but, maybe not. Hey, the fun way to die. No, but, maybe. So for me, irreverence was fundamentally important, but finding a way of expressing it that captures people's imaginations and got them to accept it. But the other point is you're often trying to get people to accept ideas that they're not sure about. So getting them to listen, getting them to sort of nod, getting them to be sympathetic to what you're doing is fundamentally, humor does that. That's why we use it. So when I went back and I was, started about the work that really, inspired me, the work that really got me into advertising. And I know I'm saying something that most of you here will know, but it is important to understand it. I mean, this was genius work. I mean, it was the work of Bill Bernbach and his agency, and I just thought it was the work that got me into this industry. When I saw this, when I was shown this, when I was at design school, I thought, that's what I definitely want to do. I think there's quite a nice story about this piece of work, which is Think Small, which is one of the famous ones. Everybody thinks it's just a commentary on big cars, small cars. And there's a man called Keith Reinhardt who was he was actually at DDB at the time, and he said, John, what everybody forgets, that it was partly to do with that, but at the time, IBM were running a campaign saying, think big. And everybody forgets that, history forgets that, so context gets lost. But actually, the brilliance of the idea really came through, even though the context at that particular time was gone. It was a wonderful, wonderful statement, brilliant piece of design, that simplicity. And actually, Bernbach's great belief, tell the truth. Tell the truth, but tell it in an interesting way. And I think for all of us, all communicators, that's what we have to do. We have to find the truth and find a way of expressing it that captures people's imagination. So I'm just going to show some of our work that I particularly like, that sort of illustrates those points. And one of the campaigns that illustrates a lot of these things I'm talking about was for a beer that we were launching, bringing down from the north of England to the south of England. Totally different attitudes about beer. This beer in the north was creamy. People loved creamy beer. Down on the south, they didn't. So the client says to us, so don't mention the cream. Whatever you do in this, don't mention the cream. So we said, I've got to, but once they see the pint in front of them, they're going to see this big head of cream. What are we going to do then? And he said, no, you must. We said, you've got to mention the cream. So we actually convinced them that this is what you had to do, that actually embrace difference, embrace something which isn't like everything else. You don't know if they'll like it. And so it was for Boddingtons beer, and we said, you've got to mention the cream. And this was the first ad we did. And we said, and it was great, wasn't it? Not only am I going to mention the cream, this is beer for men, I'm going to put it in an ice cream cone. And it was so, it was so sort of like, it really kind of confronted you in a way that it worked absolutely brilliantly. And the one thing we did with that, and again, we talk about media, we had this wonderful media idea of only buying the backs of magazines, so that when somebody sort of left a magazine lying around, you'd see it sort of coming out of from a long way away. And we call them posters in the press. And we did, it was a great campaign that went on, eventually a bit more masculine maybe there, maybe slipped back a bit, and this one here. And of course, what happens then is the client says, this is going absolutely brilliantly, I want you to run a TV ad for me. And we go, no, it's working brilliantly in the press, why do you need to do it? No, we've got to do a TV ad. So, we have this thing about what you mustn't do is do print ads in TV. We call it words on wheels. You've got to you stay with the idea, but you find a very, very different way of expressing it. And hopefully I can show you this spot that put it onto TV.
soft, smooth, luxurious sensation of pure cream.
By heck, you smell gorgeous tonight, pal.
Pamper yourself with Boddingtons, the cream of Manchester.
We got to a campaign that I was very fond of that we did. We launched Häagen-Dazs in the height of the previous recession. Everybody said, this is madness, it'll never sell, you can't sell premium ice cream. And one of the things that we did is we said, we're not going to even describe it as ice cream. You know, what's the point of calling it? There are lots of ice creams out there. One of the great lessons you learn in our industry is you have to confront clients to sort of, what business do you think you're in? And they thought they were in the ice cream business. And we said, no, you're in, you know, the ice cream is so well made, so wonderful ingredients, that actually it's a sensual pleasure. You're in the sensual business. Your competition are fragrances or whatever they might be. Don't even describe it as ice cream. And I love this campaign for a number of reasons, which I'll show you. And this was one of the first ones. There was a sort of the complete yin and yang of advertising. The left-hand side of the pages, literally we found descriptions in their manufacturing booklet how they made the ice cream. And then we just took, you can't read it, sadly, which is a shame about it. You might just be able to. And we just took out those two words and then, of course, illustrated those two words. But it was all about sensuality, dedicated to pleasure. And produced a campaign that was unlike an ice cream campaign. As I said, with the yin and the yang, left and right, that sort of logic and the heart and the head. And was hugely successful. And a campaign sometimes you do work. You ever do that? You do things and you think, if I was to go back and do it again, I would not change a thing. We live in a world today where, television, if you spoke to digital people about 4 or 5 years ago, they would say to you, well, television's all over. It's all over. Forget it. All those people doing TV ads, what's the point, And of course, what we now realize is that television is having a golden age. Look at the programs that are coming out. Look at the stuff that's coming out. TV is having a golden age. So what we've done is we've come up with this sort of doing a big blockbuster commercial. You spend all the money in 2 or 3 spots, you put it out there, and you start a conversation. And this is a very different way of actually getting people to see TV and to appreciate. And this is for The Guardian. We launched their new kind of journalism.
Little pig, let us in! It's the police! Move!
The third little pig is now being taken into custody, so the spotlight is once again shone on the grey area of homeowners' rights to protect their properties.
This isn't right. The 3 little pigs are the victims.
Blew down 2 houses. You got what you deserve.
But the pigs went too far.
You have every right to defend your property.
Kick your chinny chins up, fellas.
Boiling someone alive hardly constitutes reasonable force.
Somebody's going to break the law and intrude on you.
You can't protect yourself in your own home.
A man's home is his castle.
If someone tried to blow my house down, I'd do the same.
I knew the wolf. There's no way he could have blown down those houses. He had asthma.
But the wolf had asthma. So what's the truth about the pigs' houses being blown down? Inside job.
There's no reason why those 2 houses, one made from straw, the other from wood, should have collapsed. Not even a healthy wolf's huff and puff could bring them down.
The 3 little pigs have confessed to conspiring to commit insurance fraud, framing the wolf in an attempt to cover their tracks. Their motive was financial, as they struggled to keep up with their mortgage repayments.
Guilty. I can empathise with the pigs.
I'm behind on my payments too.
How could this have happened?
I've lost everything.
Thank you. And that's a kind of new way of working, which I really applaud. It's not, I think the 30-second television commercial is long dead. What we've got to do is think about how we do it again and make it really interesting. But I'd like to leave you with one of the things I love about advertising is the kind of way that we take complex thoughts, we take things and we reduce them down to maybe, in this case, 60 seconds. And that, for me, is one of the great, the great skills of being able to, can I have an idea to kind of really encapsulate everything in 60 seconds? Can I put that across? And I always, we made this about 5 or 6 years ago, and I love showing it, but it was for the launch of Xbox in Europe. And for me, it really captures, the meaning of life. Now, if somebody said to you, I want you to do an ad that captures the meaning of life, you think, oh, Christ, I'm not sure I'll be able to, blimey, in 60 seconds, can I do that? Well, you can, actually. And I think if I can get this up, I will show you the meaning of life in 60 seconds. Thank you. So, it can be done, you see. It can be done. Never say it can't be done. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding where I come from. As you can see, you imagine selling that to the client when I said, and the baby's going to come out. And they were horrified. You know who we are, we're Microsoft expert. I said, yeah, no, don't worry about that. This will be great. And the baby will come out, plunge down into a... Sometimes it does work, But I think, as I started out by saying, I'm driven by this thing called irreverence. You have to have a philosophy. You have to have something you believe in. If you don't believe in that, I don't think you'll ever do the great work that you're potentially there to do. And, my last plea to you all is, the quality of our work in advertising has dropped, has gone down. That isn't my opinion. There's empirical evidence that our audience believe what we're producing isn't as good as it used to be. And I think we must be the only industry in the world who actually believes you can be more successful by making a worse product. I'm not sure what business book people have read where they think, I've got the answer, let's make the product shit, and it would even be even more successful. No, you won't. It's our job, your job, to get out there and fight for great ideas. And it's creative people who are going to make the change. Other people won't. It's the creative people who will make the change. You've got to take responsibility. Thank you very much.